The Virgin Guido's Promise, The River's Edge. Before we start, just a reminder, if you enjoy this kind of content, subscribe to the channel. Now let's get to the video. The Colorado River ran high that autumn of 1987. Its muddy waters swollen with the early mountain snow that had caught everyone by surprise. Samuel Big Sam Morrison stood on the rocky bank, his withered hands gripping the reins of his chestnut mare as he watched the churning current with the calculating eye of a man who had crossed 1,000 rivers in his 43 years. At 6 feet 4 inches and built like the oak trees that dotted his sprawling ranch, Sam had earned his nickname. Honestly, everything about him was substantial, from his broad shoulders to his booming laugh, to the 10,000 acres of prime cattle land he'd carved out of the Wyoming wilderness. But today, there was no laughter in his steel-gray eyes. The river was running too fast, too deep, and the light was fading faster than he'd anticipated. He'd been visiting the Hendricks place to discuss a cattle deal, but old Tom Hendricks had been in one of his storytelling moods, and before Sam knew it, the sun was painting the western sky in shades of amber and rose. Now he faced a choice that could mean the difference between a cold, wet ride home and spending the night in town, if he could find accommodations. The nearest settlement was Willow Creek, a small farming community that had sprung up along the river's fertile banks. It wasn't much to look at: a general store, a blacksmith shop, a tiny church with a bell that rang off key, and maybe 2 dozen houses scattered along the main road like seeds thrown by a careless hand. But it would have to. Sam was just turning his horse toward the town when he heard it, a voice soft as morning mist, calling out from somewhere behind him. "Mr. Morrison?" He turned in his saddle, surprised that anyone in this remote place would know his name. Standing at the edge of a small apple orchard, silhouetted against the dying light, was a woman. Even at a distance, he could see she was young. Probably no more than 25, with dark hair pinned up in a simple style and wearing a black dress that marked her as a widow. She stood perfectly still, her hands clasped in front of her, watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Ma'am," he said, touching the brim of his hat in greeting, "I'm afraid you have me at a disadvantage. Do we know each other?" She stepped closer, moving with the careful grace of someone who had learned to be cautious around men. In the fading light, he could see that she was beautiful in the way that prairie flowers were beautiful, quietly, without ostentation, but with a natural elegance that needed no adornment. Her skin was palace cream, her eyes large and dark, and there was something in her bearing that spoke of education and refinement, unusual qualities in this rough country. "Elizabeth Hartwell," she said, her voice carrying a slight tremor that might have been nervousness or something else entirely. "Jen, I've heard of you, of course. Everyone in these parts knows about the big rancher from up north." Sam dismounted, his boots crunching on the gravelly shore. There was something about this woman that commanded respect, a dignity that seemed untouched by whatever hardships had brought her to this remote place. "Mrs. Hartwell, I'm pleased to make your acquaintance, though I have to admit, I'm curious how you knew to find me here." A faint blush colored her cheeks. "I saw you ride past my house earlier, heading toward the Hendricks place. When I saw you coming back," she paused, glancing toward the swollen river. "The water's running high tonight, dangerous for a crossing." Sam followed her gaze to the churning current. "That it is. I was just thinking I might have to impose on the hospitality of your fine town for the evening." "There's no hotel in Willow Creek," Elizabeth said quietly, "and the boarding house burned down last month. Most folks who need a place to stay end up sleeping in the church or the livery stable." The prospect of spending the night on a pile of hay in a drafty stable didn't appeal to Sam, but he'd endured worse accommodations in his time. He was about to thank her for the warning when she spoke again, so softly he almost missed it. "I have a spare room," she said, not quite meeting his eyes. "If you're in need of proper lodging." Sam studied her face in the gathering dusk. There was something vulnerable about her offer, as if she were taking a great risk simply by speaking the words. In this country, a widow, Living alone had to be careful about her reputation. Inviting a strange man to spend the night under her roof could set tongues wagging for months. That's very kind of you, Mambet. I wouldn't want to impose or cause any talk. Elizabeth's chin lifted slightly, and for a moment he saw a flash of steel beneath her gentle exterior. I'm not much concerned with talk, Mr. Morris. I've learned that people will say what they will, regardless of the truth. And the truth is, I have a warm house, a good meal cooking, and a spare bed that sees little use. It seems foolish to let a man sleep in a stable when there's no need for it. There was logic in her words, but Sam sensed there was more to her offer than simple Christian charity. He'd been around enough to recognize the signs, the way she held herself, the careful control in her voice, the slight tremor in her hand. This was a woman who had been alone too long, who was hungry for human companionship in ways that went beyond mere conversation. If you're certain it wouldn't be an inconvenience, no inconvenience at all. Her smile was like sunrise breaking through clouds. My house is just through the orchard. You can stable your horse in my barn. It's small, but it's dry and there's good hay. As they walked through the apple trees, their branches heavy with fruit that glowed like lanterns in the twilight, Sam found himself stealing glances at his hostess. There was a story here. He was certain of it. Women like Elizabeth Hartwell, educated, refined, beautiful, didn't end up in places like Willow Creek by accident. Something had driven her here, some tragedy or scandal that had left her stranded in this backwater like driftwood after a flood. Her house, when they reached it, was a surprise. It was small but well maintained, with a neat garden and curtains in the windows that spoke of a woman's touch. The interior was even more impressive, clean and comfortable, with books on the shelves and paintings on the walls that suggested a level of culture unusual for the frontier. You have a lovely home, Sam said, as she led him to the spare room. It was simply furnished but spotlessly clean, with a quilt on the bed that looked handmade and a wash basin with fresh water. Thank you. Elizabeth paused in the doorway, her hands twisting the fabric of her skirt. Supper will be ready in an hour, if that suits you. Just make yourself comfortable. She disappeared down the hallway, leaving Sam alone with his thoughts and the growing certainty that he had stumbled into something far more complex than a simple night's lodging. Through the thin walls, he could hear her moving about the kitchen, the soft sounds of a woman preparing a meal. But there was something else in those sounds, a nervous energy, an anticipation that made him wonder exactly what kind of evening lay ahead. As he washed the dust of the trail from his hands and face, Sam caught sight of himself in the small mirror above the washstand. He was still a handsome man, he supposed, though the years had left their marks. His dark hair was shot through with silver now, and there were lines around his eyes that spoke of long days in the sun and wind. He'd been married once, long ago, but Sarah had died in childbirth along with their son, and he'd never found the heart to try again. The ranch had become his life, his passion, his reason for getting up each morning. But standing in this quiet house, listening to the domestic sounds from the kitchen, he felt something stirring that he'd thought long dead. It was dangerous territory for a man his age, especially with a woman like Elizabeth Hartwell. She was young enough to be his daughter, beautiful enough to have her pick of men, and mysterious enough to make him forget all the reasons why he should saddle his horse and risk the river crossing after all. The smell of roasting chicken and fresh bread drew him from his room when she called for supper. The dining room was lit by oil lamps that cast a warm golden glow over the simple but elegant table setting. Elizabeth had changed from her black dress into something softer, a deep blue that brought out the color of her eyes and made her look younger, more approachable. I hope you're hungry, she said, bringing in a platter of food that made his mouth water. I'm afraid I got a bit carried away. You don't often have company for dinner. They ate in unfervid conversation, talking about the weather, the crops, the state of the cattle market. Elizabeth was an intelligent conversationalist, well-read and thoughtful, and Sam found himself relaxing in her company. But underneath the pleasant inner talk, he was aware of an undercurrent of tension, a sense that they were both dancing around something neither was quite ready to name. It wasn't until they'd finished the meal and she was clearing the dishes that she finally spoke the words that would change everything. "Mr. Morrison," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I know this is forward of me, but it gets so cold here at night, so terribly cold and lonely." She paused, her hands gripping a plate so tightly her knuckles were white. "If you're of a mind, I could keep you warm tonight." The words hung in the air between them like smoke from a dying fire, heavy with implication and possibility. Sam felt his breath catch in his throat as he looked at Elizabeth, really looked at her, seeing past a careful composure to the loneliness and longing beneath. She stood frozen by the table, the dinner plate still clutched in her hands, waiting for his response with the desperate stillness of a deer caught in a hunter's sights. "Elizabeth," he said gently, rising from his chair, "are you certain that's what you want?" She set the plate down with trembling fingers, not meeting his eyes. "I know what you must think of me. A proper widow shouldn't make such offers to strange men. But I've been alone for so long, and you seem like a good man, a gentleman. I thought perhaps, how long?" Sam asked, moving closer, but careful not to crowd her. "How long have you been alone?" 3 years. The words came out in a rush, as if she'd been holding them back for too long. "My husband died 3 years ago, and I've been living in this house ever since, watching the seasons change through the windows, talking to no one but the shopkeeper and the preacher's wife when she comes to check on me out of Christian duty." Sam could hear the pain in her voice, the bone-deep weariness of someone who had been carrying a heavy burden for too long. He'd known that kind of loneliness himself, the way it could eat at a person from the inside until they felt hollow as an old tree. "Tell me about him," he said. "Your husband." Elizabeth's face went very still. "What would you like to know? Whatever you're willing to share. How did you meet? What brought you to Willow Creek?" She was quiet for so long that Sam began to think she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was distant, as if she were recounting someone else's story. "His name was Thomas Harpwell. I met him in Denver, where I was working as a teacher. He was charming, handsome. He swept me off my feet with promises of other venture and a new life on the frontier." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I was 19 and foolish enough to believe that love could conquer anything. What happened? We were married within a month of meeting. Thomas said he owned land here, a farm that would support us while he pursued other business interests. But when we arrived, she shook her head. There was no farm, just this house and a few acres of scrub land that wouldn't grow anything but weeds and regret." Sam felt a cold anger building in his chest. He'd known men like Thomas Harpwell, smooth talkers who preyed on innocent women with lies and false promises. How did he die? Elizabeth's hands clenched into fists at her sides. He was shot in the back while running away from a poker game in the next town over. Apparently, he'd been cheating, and when they caught him, she shrugged. But Sam could see the shame and hurt she was trying to hide. The sheriff said it was self-defense. No charges were filed. Sorry, Sam said, and meant it. Not sorry that Thomas Harpwell was dead. The world was better off without men who lied to and abandoned their wives, but sorry for the pain Elizabeth had endured. The worst part, she continued, her voice barely audibly, was discovering that I was still a virgin on my wedding night, and every night after that for the 6 months we were married. The admission hung between them like a physical thing, raw and vulnerable. Sam felt his heart clench with sympathy for this brave, broken woman who had been failed by the one man who should have protected and cherished her. Thomas was, he preferred other diversions, she said, her cheeks burning with embarrassment. Gambling, drinking, and women who weren't his wife. He came into my bed exactly once on our wedding night. And when he couldn't, when it didn't, she took a shaky breath. He said it was my fault, that I was too cold, too proper, too much of a lady to inspire passion in a man. Sam's hands clenched into fists. If Thomas Hartwell hadn't already been dead, Sam would have been sorely tempted to kill him himself. That's not true, he said firmly. Whatever problems your husband had, they weren't your fault. Elizabeth looked up at him then, her dark eyes swimming with unshed tears. How can you be so certain? You barely know me. I know enough, Sam said, reaching out to gently touch her cheek. I know you're beautiful and kind and brave enough to offer shelter to a stranger. I know you've survived 3 years of loneliness and gossip, and God knows what else, and you're still standing. That tells me everything I need to know about your character. She leaned into his touch like a flower turning toward the sun. I've wondered, she whispered. All these years, I've wondered what it would be like to be wanted, to be desired, to feel like a real woman instead of just existing. Sam's thumb traced the line of her cheekbone, marveling at the softness of her skin. You are a real woman, Elizabeth. Any man with eyes can see that. Then show me, she said, her voice gaining strength. Please, I know it's shameful to ask, but I can't bear the thought of dying without ever knowing what it feels like to be truly alive. Sam studied her face in the lamplight, seeing the determination beneath the vulnerability. This wasn't a decision made in haste or desperation. It was the carefully considered choice of a woman who had been denied too much for too long. Are you certain? He asked one more time. Once we cross this line, there's no going back. I've never been more certain of anything in my life. Sam leaned down and kissed her then, gently at first, then with growing passion as she responded with a hunger that matched his own. She tasted like honey and hope, and when she melted against him with a soft sigh, he felt something inside his chest crack open like ice in spring. Not to hear, she whispered against his lips. In my room, please. He followed her down the hallway, his heart pounding like a young man's. Her bedroom was as neat and feminine as the rest of the house, with lace curtains and a quilt that looked like it had been made by loving hands. But it was the bed itself that caught his attention. Narrow and clearly meant for one person, a lonely widow's bed that had never known the warmth of sheer passion. Elizabeth stood beside it, suddenly shy again, her hands twisting in the fabric of her skirt. I'm not sure what to do. Thomas never taught me anything about this. Sam moved to her slowly, giving her time to change her mind if she wanted to. We'll go slow, he promised. We have all night, and there's no rush. Just let me show you how beautiful you are. He began with her hair, carefully removing the pins that held it in place until it fell in dark waves around her shoulders. She shivered when his fingers brushed her neck, and he could feel the rapid flutter at her pulse beneath his touch. You're trembling, he observed. I'm nervous, she admitted, but not afraid. Not with you. Sam kissed her again, deeper this time, and felt her begin to relax in his arms. She was a quick learner, matching his passion with her own, and when his hands began to work at the buttons of her dress, she didn't pull away. The fabric whispered to the floor, revealing a simple chemise in the pale curves of her shoulders. Sam had been with women before. He wasn't a monk, but there was something different about this moment, something sacred in the trust Elizabeth was placing in him. You're beautiful, he murmured and saw tears spring to her eyes. No one's ever said that to me before. Not like you mean it. Then they were fools, Sam said, and proceeded to show her with his hands and mouth just how beautiful he found her. What followed was a slow, careful exploration that left them both breathless and wanting more. Elizabeth was everything Sam had imagined and more, responsive, passionate, and so hungry for affection that it broke his heart. When he finally made her truly his, she cried out with a mixture of pain and pleasure that told him he was indeed her first, and the knowledge filled him with a possessive tenderness he hadn't felt in years. Afterward, they lay entwined in the narrow bed, her head on his chest and her hair spread across his skin like silk. The wind had picked up outside, rattling the windows and reminding them both that winter was coming. "Thank you," she whispered into the darkness. "For what?" "For making me feel alive. For showing me what I've been missing all these years." Sam tightened his arms around her, already dreading the moment when he would have to leave. "Elizabeth, I know," she said quickly. "I know this was just one night. You have your ranch, your life. I'm not asking for promises or declarations. I just wanted you to know that this meant everything to me." But as Sam lay there listening to her breathing, even out in sleep, he found himself thinking that maybe, just maybe, one night wouldn't be enough. Sam woke before dawn, as was his habit, but for the first time in years he felt no urge to rise and begin the day's work. Elizabeth lay curled against his side, her dark hair spread across his chest and one small hand resting over his heart. In his sleep she looked even younger, the lines of worry and loneliness smoothed away to reveal the girl she must have been before life had taught her its harder lessons. The wind had died during the night, and through the window he could see the first pale hints of sunrise painting the eastern sky. Soon he would have to get up, dress, and ride back to his ranch, where a dozen pressing matters awaited his attention. But for now, he was content to lie still and watch the woman who had given him the most precious gift imaginably. Her trust, her innocence, her passionate response to his touch. She stirred as the light grew stronger, her eyelashes fluttering against her cheeks before she opened her eyes and looked up at him. For a moment, confusion clouded her features, as if she couldn't quite believe the events of the previous night had been real. Then memory returned, and a soft blush colored her cheeks. "Good morning," she whispered. "Good morning, beautiful." She ducked her head shyly, but he could see the smile that curved her lips. "I was afraid I might have dreamed it all." "No dream," Sam assured her, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Though I have to admit, it felt pretty close to perfect." They lay in comfortable silence for a while, neither wanting to break the spell that had settled over them. But eventually, the practical realities of the world intruded. Sam could hear cattle lowing in the distance, and he knew his foreman would be expecting him back by noon. "I should get dressed," he said reluctantly. "Check on my horse. See about that river crossing." Elizabeth nodded, though he could see the disappointment she was trying to hide. "Of course, you have responsibilities." Sam sat up, studying her face in the morning light. She was even more beautiful than he'd realized, with skin like porcelain and eyes that held depths he was only beginning to explore. The thought of leaving her here alone in this isolated house filled him with an unexpected awe. "Elizabeth," he said carefully, "what if you didn't have to stay here? What if there was somewhere else you could go, something else you could do with your life?" She pulled the quilt up to cover herself, suddenly self-conscious. "What do you mean?" "I mean you're young, educated, beautiful. You could teach again, or find work in a larger town where there might be opportunities for a woman of your talents. You don't have to stay buried in Willow Creek for the rest of your life." A shadow crossed her face. "You don't understand. I can't just leave." "Why not? What's keeping you here?" Elizabeth was quiet for so long that Sam began to think she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. "Debt," she said simply. "Thomas left me with debts I'm still trying to pay off. The house, what little land we have, it's all mortgaged to the bank in the next town over. If I leave, I lose everything, and I still owe more money than I could earn in 5 years of teaching." Sam felt that cold anger return, stronger this time. Even in death, Thomas Harwell was still hurting his wife, still keeping her trapped and isolated. "How much?" he asked. "What? How much do you owe?" Elizabeth shook her head. "I couldn't ask you to. You're not asking. I'm offering." "How much?" She named a figure that made Sam's jaw clench. It was substantial, more than most people in these parts saw in a lifetime, but not impossible for a man of his means. It made good investments over the years, and his ranch was profitable enough to support such an expense without serious hardship. I could pay it off, he said quietly. All of it, today, if necessary. Elizabeth stared at him as if he'd grown a second head. You can't be serious. You barely know me. You know enough. I know you're a good woman who's been dealt a bad hand through no fault of her own. I know you deserve better than to spend the rest of your life paying for your dead husband's mistakes. But why would you do such a thing? What would you want in return? Sam reached out and took her hand, marveling at how small and delicate it felt in his work, roughened palm. I'd want you to come with me, to my ranch, as my wife if you'll have me. The words hung in the air between them, as shocking to Sam as they clearly were to Elizabeth. He hadn't planned to propose it. Harry hadn't even been thinking about marriage when he'd ridden up to that river crossing yesterday evening. But something about this woman had gotten under his skin in a way he hadn't expected, and the thought of leaving her behind felt like tearing off a piece of his soul. You asking me to marry you? Elizabeth's voice was faint with disbelief. After one night, I'm asking you to take a chance on something that could be good for both of us. You need a fresh start. And he paused, searching for the right words. I need someone to share my life with. Someone who understands what it means to be alone, who won't take for granted what we could build together. Elizabeth pulled her hand free and turned away, wrapping her arms around her knees. You don't know what you're saying. You don't know anything about me. Not really. What if I'm not the woman you think I am? What if I disappoint you? What if you don't? Sam countered. What if this is exactly what we both need, and we're too afraid to reach out and take it? She was quiet for a long time, staring out the window at the apple orchard where they'd first met. Sam could practically hear the wheels turning in her mind, weighing the risks against the possibilities. I've never been further than 50 miles from where I was born, she said finally. I don't know anything about ranching or cattle or the kind of life you lead. You can learn, and I can teach you, if you're willing. What about your neighbors, your friends? What will they think when you show up with a strange woman and announce you've married her? Sam smiled. They'll think I'm the luckiest man in Wyoming, and they'll be right. Elizabeth turned back to face him, and he could see the hope warring with fear in her dark eyes. This is crazy. People don't get married after knowing each other for one night. Some people do. Some people recognize something special when they find it and have the courage to act on it. And if it doesn't work out, if we discover we're not compatible, that we've made a terrible mistake, then we'll deal with it when it happens. But, Elizabeth, if you stay here, what kind of life are you going to have? You'll spend the next 20 years paying off your husband's debts, growing old and bitter in this house, watching life pass you by through the windows. Is that really what you want? She closed her eyes, and Sam could see tears leaking from beneath her lashes. I'm scared, she whispered. So am I, he admitted. But I'm more scared of riding away from here and spending the rest of my life wondering what might have been. Elizabeth opened her eyes and looked at him, really looked at him, as if she were trying to see into his soul. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied her, because she took a deep, shaky breath and nodded. All right, she said. Yes, I'll marry you. Sam felt a surge of joy, so intense it nearly knocked him breathless. He pulled her into his arms and kissed her deeply, tasting salt from her tears and the sweetness of new beginnings. We'll do this right, he promised against her lips. I'll ride into town this morning and settle your debts, arrange for the preacher to marry us properly. Then we'll pack up whatever you want to take with you and head home. Home, Elizabeth repeated, as if testing the word. I liked the sound of that. 3 hours later, Sam rode out of Willow Creek with his new wife, beside him on a gentle mare he'd purchased from the livery stable. Elizabeth's few possessions were packed in saddlebags behind them, and in Sam's coat pocket was a marriage certificate signed by a preacher who'd been more than happy to perform the ceremony for a generous donation to his church. As they crested the hill that would take them away from the river valley, Elizabeth turned for one last look at the place that had been her prison for 3 years. Then she faced forward, toward the mountains and the new life waiting for her, and Sam saw nothing but determination in her profile. "No regrets?" he asked. "None," she said firmly. "Whatever happens, it has to be better than what I'm leaving behind." Sam reached over and took her hand, squeezing gently. "It will be, I promise you that." As they rode toward the setting sun, Sam found himself thinking about the strange turns life could take. Yesterday he'd been a confirmed bachelor, content with his solitary existence. Today he was a married man, responsible for the happiness and well-being of the remarkable woman riding beside him. It should have terrified him. Instead, he felt more alive than he had in years, filled with possibilities and plans for the future. Elizabeth had whispered that she could keep him warm for one night, but Sam suspected she was going to do much more than that. She was going to bring light and laughter and love back into his life, and in return, he was going to spend every day making sure she never regretted taking a chance on a big rancher who'd been foolish enough to fall in love at first sight. The river was behind them now, and ahead lay home.